The Nelson Mandela Bay Metro Municipality in the Eastern Cape will brief the media shortly to give an update about the water status in the metro. This follows an announcement by the municipality that water coming out of its distribution system could present a risk to human health if ingested. Residents have been advised to boil water before consumption. Let's now listen in.
Dose it with chlorine and blend it with most of the water that comes from the noise contact treatment works. I'll speak to that aspect a little bit later into the presentation, as it actually presents risk to the water quality aspect. The other scheme, which is one of the odd schemes, the Sand River Bulk, we get plus or minus 10 megaliters of water out of this system. It actually then takes water from the odd dams, and we treat it here by what used to be macro at Linton, and we actually then reticulate it into the system. There is now the Grundout treatment system as well, which supplies most of water to the Kariecha area. And I think, again, it's quite a smallish system, but again, it's also one of the systems that we are currently having. Then the biggest main system that is currently being affected by the drought, that is the Churchill and Mpofu dams. These are the dams that are sitting in the Crom River, and where we are actually having, water shortfalls currently, or that is being affected by the drought. We have got a restriction of 70% from the Department of Water and Sanitation, and we are not able to get, enough water from that system. Traditionally, we used to get 70% of water from this system, but currently we know we are only getting 30% of the water from this system. Next. Then the last one, system which we share with the farmers is the Kocha system. We share with the farmers in Petensi. The metro gets water from this system. Currently, there is also a restriction on this system, and we are restricted to about 70% as well. And we have reduced considerably the amount of water that we are taking from this dam. And I think combined all these systems, then they actually then give water into the metro. And currently combined, we are getting plus or minus 230 megaliters of water from all these systems. But I think it's important for me to highlight that, our current consumption as we speak is sitting at about 278 megaliters on average. There is a huge deficit in terms of what we are getting from the system as well as what we are actually consuming as a city. And I think it's imperative that we need to reduce the water footprint of the metro for us to be able to meet the production that is available to us. And this probably sustainably will actually then build a water resilient city into the future. The use of water prudently needs to be a culture, and I think we have, as a city, must actually join hands and collaboratively reduce our consumption for us to be able to have sustainable water resources for both economic as well as domestic consumption. One more very small system which we have is the springs, but I think we get just probably under 1 meg out of that, and I think it's not that significant. It goes as well as the Ute Neck. I've mentioned all of the dams and systems in the city, and combined we have got storage of 16.98 percentage, and this is actually quite still a crisis as we speak, and the prospects of rain into the future is very limited, as we learned from the South African Weather Service. If we are going to get rain, it's only going to be average rain, and it's not going to be able to raise or lift our dam levels and take us out of this crisis. I'm just showing a depiction of the trends in terms of the capacities. I think over time we have seen a deterioration of our dams, and I think as we project, we continue to see that a trend. And as I said, it remains a crisis, and we are required actually to reduce consumption. Next. Just a pictorial view of some of the pictures that have been taken during the course of this drought. And I think we are here to demonstrate that some of our major dams, there is quite little water. And again, we can attest to the quality of the water in the dams if you look to the right side of the picture, you see actually it's muddy water-like, and that requires a lot of effort for you to be able to clean it. But nevertheless, I think with the kind of processes which we have at our treatment works, as well as capacity from a technical point of view, we continue to produce water of quality that meet the standards in terms of 241. Next. I've talked to this slide already, but I think I'm just trying to demonstrate the available water to us, which we can produce. I said just under 230 megaliters on a daily basis. And this has to be compared to the consumption that we are actually having of plus or minus 278 megaliters on a daily basis. Probably one wonders what is happening to that deficit. Because we've got plus or minus 79 reservoirs in the city, we are managing that deficit within our reservoir systems. That's why at times, if we've got any operational hassle in the system, it might be a pump station that have failed or bulk pipeline that have collapsed. Immediately, we deplete storage, and that have got no consequences in terms of intermittent supply, whereby we can go plus or minus 3-4 days without water in some other areas. And this has been quite a common phenomenon in the western areas, Lorraine, Kabika, and others, most of the western area suburbs. As we speak currently, for example, we are having water shortfalls around those areas. But I think, again, it's linked to the operational decision which we have taken now in order to deal with the quality aspect. But I think as we speak, we are having intermittent supply within the city, and that on its own has got a huge complications in terms of how we deal with the quality of the water ultimately. I think it's important that I speak to the Grassridge temporary treatment works, which is one of our temporary arrangements which we have put in place to augment the amount of water which we require into the city. Because currently we are having Neukadak Phase 3, which is supposed to augment that treatment plant to give us plus or minus 210 megaliters at peak. Currently, the plant is giving us about 140 megaliters, and the idea is to then utilize the whole quota which we get from the Department of Water and Sanitation of 210. And then we have devised or dusted up a plan that was implemented in around 1994, where a reservoir was converted into a temporary treatment works. We actually then pump raw water from the Neukadak treatment works, about 40 megaliters, into this Grassridge reservoir. We then actually apply chemicals, stir it up, then we allow it to settle. Once that is done, then we take clear water out of that reservoir and we add chlorine. We then blend it with the plus or minus 140 that comes from the conventional treatment process at Neukadak. We blend it at Motherwell, and we then pump it across into the city. This, from an operational point of view and from a risk point of view, there were actually risks associated with this, because Grassridge is not a conventional treatment facility. But in drought, for us to be able to meet the deficit between what we are consuming as well as what we are producing, we thought, I think, it was a system which we can implement and try to manage the quality risk aspect of it. But I think now, over a year, plus or minus a year after the delay in the Neukadak Phase 3, the risk associated with quality begins now to materialize. And I think we've taken certain decisions around managing that. I'll speak to that in the presentation. Okay, we just showing how the system is configured. For the benefit, we have got what you call the low-level scheme as well as a high-level scheme. We are producing 140 megaliters from the conventional Neukadak treatment works. We pump it through the low-level scheme into Kuhakop Reservoir. Then we have the high-level scheme that links up with Grassridge, where we are pumping in raw water into the Grassridge, plus or minus 40 megaliters. Then we treat it, the way we are treating it currently. Then at Motherwell, the blend, and we pump it into the system, and that's distributed in areas like Dispatch, Utneck, as well as, the western areas, Bloemandal, Berthelsdorp, all those areas. So that's just a slide to show the configuration, how it works. Next. Probably just more elaborate, just showing exactly the zones which are actually then served by the water from the Neukatak treatment works. Obviously, I've mentioned that. We blend it where it's written Mother Pump Station, then we pump it into Stanford Road. Then from there, it actually then goes to other areas, Konobushe, including the western areas as well, Dispatch, as well as a part of Kariecha. Next. Just a pictorial view of the Grassridge Reservoir, which we are using currently as a temporary treatment facility. And as I've said, it worked well for quite some time. I mean, our blending has actually managed to reduce the risk of the quality, but I think with time, it's proving that, it's not a conventional system, and that's where we picked up, some of the quality problems that we are experiencing currently in the city. If I can, we because of sludge buildup at the bottom of the reservoir, it ended up actually not being able to separate, clear water as well as the sludge at the bottom, and I think the contamination happened in that process. It's just a pictorial view of the treatment process. I'm not going to go bore the conference with that the next, but I think there's quite a number of chemicals that we use, in our treatment process. Others is chlorine, lime, alum, and all this we actually use in the treatment facilities for us to be able to achieve, the required quality standards. Importantly, while we are here, I think we need to discuss some of the failures and risks associated with the quality from the perspective of how we do our business on a day-to-day basis. And I think it's important for us to understand how water is produced and how it gets to our tap. On a day-to-day basis, we have got 7 treatment facilities in the metro across, where we actually extract raw water from our sources. We put it in our treatment facilities, and in there we have got a processing monitoring system that is done by the process controllers, whereby every 4 hours we check the quality of water. We actually adjust, the chemicals that are required at any given point, depending on the quality of raw water that is coming into the system. And all those records are kept because at one point we should have an auditable process that can actually deal with how we do our business. There is a weekly monitoring process of the water that comes from each treatment works. What happens is after water has been treated, it goes into a clear well, and there on a weekly basis we take samples and we do final profiling of those samples according to Science 241 to see whether it does meet our requirements. And as I've said, most of all our treatment works are actually meeting the quality standards, with an exception of the Grassridge temporary treatment works. Monthly reservoir samplings, as part of the day-to-day business, environmental health, also as part of what they do, we do what we call reservoir sampling. We check all our reservoirs whether they do comply, because we pump water from different treatment works into bulk reservoirs and distribute into distribution reservoirs. We then make sure that we take samples in those reservoirs to ensure that the water is still within the quality that is required. And if there's any problem, then there is remedies and protocols that we actually implement in order to rectify that. Weekly reticulation sampling by public health, that is actually done in some of the sampling points in the reticulation system. Public health, they've got public health officials that goes and takes samples. There is a procedure in terms of how those samples are taken, and they actually then submit it to our scientific service, where testing of those samples are done to actually determine whether they do comply with science drinking quality standards. We do then report our quality to the Department of Water and Sanitation, and those results are actually kept on a website. Any member of the public can actually interrogate the website and see, how we are actually complying in terms of, the quality of our water standards. Next. Okay. The problem statement. Why did we have what happened, a couple of weeks ago in terms of the quality deterioration of water into our reticulation? So there have been quite periodical failures in terms of our sampling over time, stretching from, I'd say, around October, November last year. We had actually samples that has failed, and as per protocol, what we do is that we immediately do a resample. But before a resample is done, there are remedies that are actually put in place to ensure that there is corrective action in terms of water that is there. So ordinarily, if there is a sample, then probably we dose additional chemicals into the system depending on the failure. And once that is done, we do a resampling. And as from the past couple of months, from October also, there has been that rectification process, and most of our resampling has been coming out clear and comply in terms of sense. But I should also mention that with intermittent supply currently in the city, as I've said, that we are managing the deficit in our storage reservoirs. There's been quite fluctuating levels of water into our levels, and that itself is a concern, because ordinarily in reservoirs over time there is actually settling of silt and mud at the bottom of the reservoir. Once we have this so-called intermittent supply or depletion of storage in our reservoirs, then you end up having water being pushed into the reticulation from the data that is at the bottom of the reservoir. And that itself creates, a concern from a quality point of view. We have complaints of discoloration over time, and I think in the Newton Park area, around December, January as well. And from a health perspective, we have looked into microbiological parameters, and I think they seem to be clear, but this was only a function, of, the discoloration was a function of, the silt and mud residuals in the reservoir, as well as to a greater extent the change of velocities due to some other interventions which we have actually done in our reticulation system to reduce, consumption. These are namely probably pressure reducing valves. We are actually doing pressure management, and that has actually increased, the velocities in our pipe, and it tends to then create, sort of turbulence in the pipe that will actually then wash away some of the lining that is in the pipe, and it causes discoloration at the end of the day. As I said, there's been quite high turbidity, as well as in other instances insufficient residual chlorine because of temperatures as well. Currently we are in summer, we end up with problems in terms of residual chlorine, but again there's a corrective action of adding that up into our reservoirs, as well as strategic points within the reticulation system. Okay, so I just need to talk about then what happens as from Monday this week. That we had quite a samples that were taken previous weeks before, and obviously there was repeat samples that was they failed initially. They failed, and then there were actually repeat samples that was actually taken after those samples had failed. Initially, like any other remedies that we do, we then did applied, our remedies, add chlorine into the system because these are microbiological samples that failed, and we discovered that there is E. coli in the water, and we did apply, those remedies and protocol and did the resamplings, but again, the results come out as failures. And I think from that, then we actually then promoted to actually issue out a boil notice, which was then issued to the whole public that we mustn't actually drink water, and from a precautionary point of view, people must boil water and use any other recognized, methods to make the water safe. That was done, and obviously from an engineering point of view, we had to troubleshoot the system and establish exactly what was the problem, where was it coming from, where was the contamination coming from. So there was an audit of all our plants. We started with all the conventional plants that we have got, 7 out of the city, and we established that the results were consistent. There were no failures in terms of those, and eventually we started to analyze the zones that are actually failing, and we discovered that it was the Chelsea Reservoir Zone. But again, we extended that by elimination as well. Where is Chelsea getting its water from? Or it's Nokiadak. Then we traced back the results, and we actually ended up at Grassridge treatment facility. And this was because over time, as I mentioned, that the treatment facilities had been compromised, as a result of, a sludge settling at the bottom, and at the point in time we couldn't actually then get clear water on top, which we could chlorinate and get into the system. And this compromised big time the quality output of that. So the E. coli was actually coming out from Grassridge temporary treatment works, which we had put out as a measure to augment supply into the city whilst waiting for the Noikadak Phase 3 to be completed. A decision was then taken immediately to isolate the system from our bulk reticulation system, and that was done on Tuesday evening. And immediately we dosed chlorine into the reticulation system. We added chlorine into the reticulation system, and we did take then samples from the points that had actually previously failed. Those results are actually part of what we're going to be presenting today, and I'm glad to say that all E. coli has been cleared from water. There is no E. coli currently. There is just what we call coliforms that are still in the water, plus or minus 70% compliance. We'll be working through that. I think Dr. Ndwele can talk to that, to ensure that that is cleared as well, and we take other additional samples, which we then present again to the citizens to say that the water is now safe to drink, and that is currently happening as we speak. But I think it becomes important that on Monday there was an awareness plan that we had to communicate with all the residents to ensure that at least we reduce health risk associated with drinking water. As I said, the boil notice was sent out, circulated to most of residents through various media platforms, and that again continues to be work currently happening with environmental health practitioners being engaged in communities and educating people around this aspect. I should mention that our isolation of Grassridge temporary treatment works has created new problems for us in the fact that from a quantity point of view, we've got less water in the reticulation system. We are now plus or minus 40 megaliters less into the reticulation system, which it means that some of the communities as we speak does not have water, and these include areas around the western suburbs, areas around Lorraine, Krahakama, Sherwood, Kapika, and all those high-lying areas. We are getting water.
There we go. The Nelson Mandela Bay Metro at pains trying to fend off fears of a potential water crisis in the metro. The municipal water supply in the metro may be unsafe for consumption, and city officials have warned residents to boil their water before drinking or cooking until further notice. Now, in a statement on Monday night, the municipality said its latest water quality test results revealed that water quality had actually deteriorated and certain microbiological limits were exceeded.